The film begins with the narrator, Sebastian J Cricket, telling the story of Geppetto, a woodcarver. Geppetto and his son, Carlo, live peacefully together in Italy during World War I, enjoying each other's company and sharing stories while Geppetto works on his creations. One day, Geppetto is hired to build a crucifix for the local church, but they are forced to return home when fascist planes fly over Italy and drop bombs in the area. Carlo runs back into the church to retrieve a pine cone he had dropped, and a bomb drops on the church, killing Carlo in front of Geppetto. Geppetto is deeply grief-stricken by Carlo's death, and even after he buries the pine cone and it grows into a tree over Carlo's grave, he is unable to move on from his loss. In his drunken sadness, Geppetto chops down the tree and brings a large log of it back to his house. He begins to carve a wooden boy, but leaves the puppet unfinished. As Geppetto passes out, Sebastian, who had stowed away in the log, is left to wander the house. During the night, several eyeball spirits enter the house and combine to form the body of a Wood Sprite. Using her magic, the Wood Sprite brings the wooden puppet to life and names him Pinocchio. Sebastian protests this, but the Wood Sprite offers him a wish in exchange for guiding Pinocchio in his life. Sebastian agrees, hoping to use the wish to gain fame and wealth. When Geppetto wakes up the next morning, he is shocked to find Pinocchio alive and playing around the house. He is initially frightened by the sight of a talking wooden boy and a cricket, but Pinocchio is full of childlike excitement as he discovers the contents of the house. Geppetto has to leave for church, so he locks Pinocchio in the closet and tells him to stay there. Despite Sebastian's suggestion that Pinocchio obey Geppetto, the boy's curiosity gets the better of him, and he leaves the house to join Geppetto at the church. When Pinocchio arrives at the church and reveals himself to the congregation, everyone is horrified by the sight of a living puppet. When Pinocchio declares that he is a real boy made of flesh and bone, his nose begins to grow. Geppetto is forced to take Pinocchio home, as the members of the congregation jeer and admonish him for creating such a creature. Geppetto tends to Pinocchio's injured nose after the incident at the church, and is later visited by the Podesta and a priest, along with the Podesta's son, Candlewick. They discuss the possibility of making Pinocchio a model citizen in order to ensure that he is not a threat to society. When Pinocchio sees the others drinking hot chocolate and asks for some, Geppetto agrees to give him some. As Pinocchio sits next to Candlewick, he mimics the other boy's actions, but ends up sticking his feet in the fireplace. While Pinocchio finds the experience amusing, Geppetto frantically tries to put out the fire and ends up dunking Pinocchio into a water bucket to extinguish the flames. Pinocchio's legs are burned off in the process. The Podesta orders Geppetto to send Pinocchio to school, and he agrees. Later, Sebastian tells Pinocchio about Carlo and how Geppetto has been grieving his loss for many years. As Pinocchio goes to help Geppetto at the church, he is spotted by a white monkey named Spazzatura, who belongs to a showrunner called Count Volpe. Volpe's circus has not been doing well in recent years, and he sees Pinocchio as an opportunity to increase business. Spazzatura runs to Volpe and shows him Pinocchio, and Volpe believes that the puppet will be his newest star attraction. Pinocchio heads off to school, but is intercepted by Volpe, who convinces him to join the circus in order to become famous. Pinocchio signs a contract and joins Volpe and Spazzatura. Pinocchio is a hit with Volpe's audience, performing as a singing puppet with no strings. Geppetto finds out from the Podesta that Pinocchio did not go to school, and he tracks down the boy at the circus. As Pinocchio becomes more and more dishonest, the other children find it amusing when his nose grows as a result of his lies. Volpe and Geppetto argue over where Pinocchio belongs, and they begin pulling on him, resulting in Pinocchio being thrown into the street, where he is hit by a car and killed. Pinocchio wakes up in the afterlife and finds a group of black rabbits gathered around him, as they are responsible for bringing the deceased into this realm. They tell Pinocchio that he needs to speak with Death in order to resolve his situation. Pinocchio meets Death, who is the sister of the Wood Sprite. She is annoyed that her sister gave life to Pinocchio, but she explains to him that since he is not technically a real boy, he can continue to die and be brought back to life after certain waiting periods. She also tells him that he will eventually outlive everyone close to him. Pinocchio returns to life in front of Geppetto, Volpe, the Podesta, and others. The Podesta believes that Pinocchio's immortality makes him a useful soldier in the war, but Volpe insists that Pinocchio belongs to him since he signed the contract and claims that Geppetto owes him money. Geppetto takes Pinocchio home, and the two of them get into an argument when Pinocchio expresses a desire to join the war. Geppetto calls Pinocchio a burden, which makes the puppet sad as he thinks Geppetto truly means it. Sebastian tries to convince Pinocchio otherwise, but the puppet decides that he can help Geppetto financially by returning to the circus. Pinocchio traps Sebastian under a cup to stopping him. Pinocchio returns to Volpe and asks that he send Pinocchio's earnings to Geppetto, to which Volpe agrees even though he is clearly lying. Geppetto finds Sebastian after he freed himself and discovers that Pinocchio has flowed. As Geppetto sits feeling sorry for himself, Sebastian berates him for making Pinocchio feel bad, despite the love the puppet had given him. The two of them resolve to go and find Pinocchio themselves, and take a boat to an island where they believe he may have headed. However, they are both devoured by a sea monster. Pinocchio continues to be a star attraction in Volpe's show. Spazzatura uses marionettes to communicate with Pinocchio, telling him that Volpe is not actually sending Geppetto the money he has earned, and that the showrunner is using him. Spazzatura also claims that he is Volpe's favorite, but Pinocchio does not believe that Volpe would do such a thing. Volpe overhears the conversation and beats Spazzatura for trying to turn Pinocchio against him. However, Pinocchio confronts Volpe about his treatment of the monkey, and the showrunner shows his true colors, stating that he is the master of both Pinocchio and Spazzatura, and threatening both of them if they defy him again. Volpe puts on a show for Prime Minister Benito Mussolini, who is said to enjoy puppets. As payback for Volpe's mistreatment of him and Spazzatura, Pinocchio puts on a crude display to mock Mussolini in front of the showrunner. While the children in the audience find the performance amusing, Mussolini is not amused and orders Pinocchio to be shot and the circus to be burnt down. Pinocchio returns to the afterlife and waits to be revived. Pinocchio reawakens on his way to a fascist training camp along with the Podesta and Candlewick. While at the camp, Pinocchio befriends Candlewick, who confides in him about his frustration with his father's attempts to mold him into his own image and force him to fight in an unnecessary war. The two of them play a game of capture, the flag using paintball guns, and have a good time, but when they announce that they have reached a tie, the Podesta orders Candlewick to break the tie by shooting Pinocchio with a real gun. As airplanes fly overhead to attack, the Podesta continues to demand that Candlewick pick up the gun, but the boy stands up to his father for the first time. The Podesta tries to shoot Pinocchio himself, but Candlewick hits him with a paintball gun and traps him in a net, just as he watches a bomb drop on the training camp, killing himself and the Podesta. Pinocchio is thrown into the ocean, but is found by Volpe and Spazzatura. The Count ties Pinocchio to a cross and prepares to burn him as punishment for costing him his show and humiliating Mussolini. Pinocchio pleads with Spazzatura, and the monkey finally turns against his master. He frees Pinocchio and tackles Volpe off a cliff, where the showrunner lands on a rock and Spazzatura falls into the ocean. Pinocchio jumps in after him, and they are both swallowed by the same sea monster that had earlier consumed Geppetto and Sebastian. Pinocchio reunites with Geppetto and comes up with a plan to escape from the sea monster. He begins to tell enough lies to make his nose grow large enough to reach the monster's blowhole. As Pinocchio makes his way over to the blowhole, he falls with Geppetto, but the monster blows all of them out of the hole. The monster then goes after Pinocchio, who has found a sea mine, and gets the monster to latch onto its tooth. The monster starts charging towards Geppetto, Sebastian, and Spazzatura, but Pinocchio activates the mine and blows the monster to pieces. When Pinocchio arrives in the afterlife, he begs Death to let him go back to life faster in order to save Geppetto, but she warns him that if he breaks the rules, he will become mortal and will not come back to life again. Pinocchio shatters the hourglass that sends him back to life and returns immediately to save Geppetto from drowning. Everyone reaches the shore, but Pinocchio is dead for real this time. Geppetto weeps for his son, and the Wood Sprite appears behind him. She tells Geppetto that Pinocchio's sacrifice for him has made him a real boy, but he cannot come back to life. Sebastian then uses his wish to bring Pinocchio back to life, and the Wood Sprite grants it for him. Pinocchio returns and is happily embraced by everyone. Sebastian concludes his story by saying that Pinocchio had many great memories with Geppetto, Spazzatura, and himself. However, as Death had told him, everyone Pinocchio loves will have to go someday, and one by one, Geppetto, Sebastian, and Spazzatura all pass away. After Pinocchio is left alone, he sets off on a new adventure. During the credits, Sebastian is shown as having told the stories to the Black Rabbits before breaking out into a song.